This episode is brought to you by WeatherGuard Lightning Tech. At WeatherGuard, we support design engineers and make lightning protection easy. You're listening to the Struck Podcast. I'm Dan Blewett.
I'm Alan Hall.
And here on Struck, we talk about everything aviation, aerospace engineering, and lightning protection. All right, welcome back to the Struck Podcast. I'm your co-host, Dan Blewett. On today's show, first in our news segment, we're going to talk about Delta, where they're going to be one of the last airlines to stop blocking middle seats. So we'll talk a little bit about COVID and whether we're out of the woods yet, which the answer is hopefully. Number two, there was an interesting article recently released about FAA regulations for evacuations and how those testing protocols might be kind of flawed, lending that data to be maybe a misrepresentation of how safe evacuation procedures are. We'll also chat a little bit about the Virgin Galactic VSS getting closer to potentially making these pretty amazing orbital launches. And then our engineering segment, we're going to talk about the Heart Aerospace ES-19. Fener is considering purchasing 20 of these, and it looks like a pretty interesting little electric aircraft. And lastly, in our EVTOL segment, we'll talk about a little bit about stocks and a lot about the Horizon Cavorite X5. So Alan, first let's go to Delta. You've been on a bunch of flights recently. I was on a bunch of flights in March. Were any of your middle seats not occupied, or at least blocked?
So I flew Southwest a couple of times, and when the flights were not full, they would tell you to not sit in the middle seat, right? But they were allowing people to sit in middle seats.
People are like, no, I want to sit in this middle seat. Are you sure? Are you sure she move? Yeah, we've been doing that for a long time. Yeah,
but Southwest was one of the first ones to block off middle seats along with Delta. But Delta's the last one to relinquish that middle seat and let people occupy it. I think it's going to start on May 1st, which is there has been some problems at Delta because they don't have enough airplanes, enough staff to staff the sort of influx of the traveling public that wants to get back on an airplane and go see family or go on vacation or whatever. So they need to open those middle seats to just handle the crush of people that are going to be one, probably vaccinated, or two, not likely to get it and want to go get out of the house. That's going to happen. It's springtime, and that's what happens. And if there's any school vacation wrapped up into it, you're going to see a lot of people hit the road.
Well, you and I haven't really checked in recently about COVID incidences on planes, but there's really been no news about it, has there? I mean,
no.
Air travel's picked up a lot, and middle seats have been occupied in most of my flights. I mean, I think only one of my 4 or 5 legs, my recent trip, that we just didn't have a full plane, so I had a middle seat open next to me. But all the other ones, I was actually sitting in the middle seat because it's just easier. I'm not too picky about where I sit if I'm gonna do writing or do work. Doesn't really matter. I'll just jump in the one of the front seat, so I'm off the plane faster, which I prefer anyway. So I'm not sure that it's really been a big deal. So I'm not sure people should really be that nervous. I don't know. I didn't feel particularly nervous about traveling, sitting in a middle seat or having a full flight. But I don't know. I mean, the air circulation and
the cleanliness
that system is and the cleanliness seems to be pretty good, right? Yeah.
There's been no reports or no information about transmission during on airplanes. There has been almost none over the last year, which is surprising. Because you think of airplanes as being sort of this enclosed airspace thing where you're next to somebody for a couple of hours, but for whatever reason, and I'm not sure we're ever going to find out for sure, the ventilation systems must be very well equipped to turn over the airflow inside the airplane and control where aerosols are going. And two, having the mask, I'm sure makes a somewhat of a difference. How much, nobody knows, but there just haven't been any confirmed transmission, especially on any large scale, via flights. Zero, at least in the United States. It's amazing.
Yeah. Well, speaking of other full flight news, the FAA, makes evacuation tests, and there are results that needed to get released recently. And it sounds like they've been delayed because, and this is, it sounds like still a little bit of speculation, but that they might be embarrassed of the results of these tests. So it sounds like the FAA did not include a lot of people that would be representative of a normal, a normal flight, which includes people over 60, all the carry-on baggage, service animals, the obese people, individuals whose primary language is in English,
kids,
children sitting in their parents' lap. Yep.
Right.
So it sounds like if you're doing an evacuation test and you don't include all those people, which, a flight is full of, it's a very diverse group of people, then how generalizable is that test? So, Alan, you're familiar with some of these tests. It sounds like Pete Buttigieg has some work to do figuring out what's going on here, but what does it sound like to you?
Well, Congress has been pushing for the last couple of years to create more realistic evacuation tests, because the concern has always been that you can load up a test with essentially healthy, I want to say healthy, people that are very mobile. Let's put it that way. People who can get up and get off the airplane pretty quickly and are in good enough shape to go down the slide or go down the evacuation routes without really seriously hurting themselves. So that's like your best marker, right? So you put a bunch of healthy 20 to 50-year-olds on an airplane and say, all right, everybody get off, then you're going to get one answer, versus if you put a bunch of young kids on it, like you're going to Orlando, that's a totally different answer. But you need to have some basis somewhere of what that looks like. And I think it's the corollary to this is like when we started estimating the average passenger to assign a weight to them, which is probably more representative of what the actual weight of a passenger was in the United States versus what they required to count each passenger. And I think it was like 180 pounds sticks in my head, and the average U.S. passenger is somewhere in the 200-pound range. There's some delta like that they're trying to adjust to the actual population. So this is in that sort of similar vein of, let's load the airplane for something representative of a typical flight, and let's see what happens. And the results are not necessarily public yet, which is weird because you think that would be publicized. So it makes you, your first thought is, well, they're going to try to hide it, delay it because it was bad. But it may just be because of COVID. It's not going to come out because things are slower. But I do think there's some consequences to that. And I think the first consequence is, say it's not great. Say the evacuation with a more randomized distribution of people on the airplane is not as fast as you would like it to be. Okay, what is it? And what is that number? And what have recent aircraft emergency situations really needed to get off the airplane? What are those? There's two variables here: how fast you can pull them off, and what you really need to get them off in, and what those standards are. Are the standards about emergency exits what they should be? Who knows? But I think the other part of it is that probably the biggest problem on any sort of emergency evacuation is people taking their carry-on luggage off, like we saw in Moscow with that airplane that got struck by lightning and then sort of crash landed and caught on fire on the runway. People were taking their carry-on luggage off the airplane, and that had to relate in people dying in the back of that airplane because you can't get out. I mean, the airplane's on fire. That's your worst situation. You need to get out as fast as you can, and people were carrying their stinking luggage.
Yeah, that's
so
crazy.
Right. Is it the distribution? Is it an age distribution, whether you're have a disability, or is it just, in a real world situation, people are going to start reaching for the laptops? Which one is worse? Probably the laptop one is probably the worst case one, honestly. So, how realistic can you make these things? You probably really can't make them realistic, but you need to go back and look at the accidents that have happened to see what people are doing. I think it's probably the bigger thing. And I know there was an airline recently that started making you pay, like Ryanair, one of them started making you pay for the carry-on luggage. Maybe you won't be able to take some carry-on luggage on me. Instead of 2 items, it'll be 1 because of that emergency exit thing.
Moving on, Virgin Galactic, their crazy-looking spaceship that's got this beautiful, like, shiny mirror finish, essentially, the VSS Imagine, which is the 3rd iteration of their spacecraft, hopes to be in service next year at the low price of $250,000 per passenger, $200,000 to $250,000. and it looks like the plane can take 6 people up for each flight. So, $1.5 million potentially in revenue per flight, and Virgin hopes to do 400 per day per spaceport
400 a year.
each year.
400 a year.
400 flights from each spaceport per year.
Yeah.
So how many spaceports they'll have, I'm not exactly sure, but that seems like a pretty viable business if they can eventually get there. But do you see it being at that 400 flight per year number? That seems like a lot of people to pay $250,000.
Right. I mean, it seems to me it has to be set up in the heart of Silicon Valley, where there's that kind of, or someplace like Houston, where there's just a lot of people with cash, or Austin, as it sounds like now, where there's a lot of cash, right? I mean, you need to have an affluent community to be able to afford that. And I'm just not certain that this is the right time for it. Maybe if there's some economic boom when we all get off COVID and there's the government's just flooding the economy with cash right now, maybe they can pull it off. It is cool. I mean, there's nothing. Obviously, it's cool, and Richard Branson does a lot of really neat and interesting things in the aircraft design, is concept, and the actual the aircraft themselves or spacecraft are really interesting. So it's cool technology. I just don't know if they're going to make enough money on the sale of those things. I hope so. I really hope so. But the feeling right now is like everybody is so sort of cash tight, not sure what to do with all this cash. Are they going to spend $250,000 on that? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. The idea of this type of flight seems also kind of scary. I don't know. I mean, everyone wants, especially if you have a lot of money and you've sort of made it, this seems like a pretty cool thing. Like, I've been weightless for 6 minutes, which is what they claim you'll get in one of these flights.
Yeah.
That's a pretty amazing experience. And if you have 20, 30, 40, $50 million, that $250,000 might be worth it to you. But I don't know what the safety record of this. I mean, this seems pretty uncharted, right? And I don't know. It's like,
somewhat.
I don't know.
They made a lot of improvements since they had some early on problems, right? So they've changed a lot about the design and the safety aspects. I think conceptually, it's baseline operation, the theory of it are pretty safe in terms of space travel, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
Because conceptually, if you start looking at the individual pieces, they've done their homework, and they've made a bunch of safety improvements after they had that accident. So right now, it's probably as safe as it's ever going to be. Obviously, those first couple of flights are going to be really critical to the advancement of it, and Branson's supposedly going to fly in one of the early ones. That'll be a big deal in terms of selling it, right? So Branson goes,
sure.
It'd be like Elon Musk flying in the Starship or a Falcon 9 or something. Not that he needs to do that, but if he wanted to promote it, that's how you do it. It's like Bezos doing the Blue Origin spacecraft launch. If he's in one of those, I mean, it would really help promote the vehicle.
Especially if you're a passenger, yeah. Like, how could you not be Richard Branson for his affinity for taking risks and not be a passenger in his plane? If you're going to fly the plane, like, SpaceX, that's a little different. Of course, I know they have a civilian mission coming up. That's a lot different. But if you're just going to sit back and, you've got to take a ride in your own craft for sure. So moving on, reporting from Aerotime Hub, Fener's considering the purchase of 20 ES-19s, which is Heart Aerospace's electric aircraft. And this is not an EVTOL. This is a conventional takeoff. But it seems really cool, and it seems like, I like it because we spend all of our episodes these days looking at these crazy new EVTOL designs that are, many very outside the box and arguably wacky. But this one looks like a real plane. Like, it just looks deliciously viable and reliable. Like, it looks like a classic airplane. Alan, what's your take on the ES-19 from Heart Aerospace?
I think the key to any of these aircraft is finding the right market category and how to hit it. And obviously, they're not going to have a huge amount of range. But on the commuter side, you don't need a lot of range. And that the 19-passenger aircraft has been sort of a sweet spot at times, depending on what part of the world you're operating in. Those shorter routes can be profitable, right? Because you're not in the air all that long. And if you have a basic aircraft configuration that has proven experience, and this type of aircraft design as a basic aircraft design has been used for a long time. So you got a very simplistic shape airplane. You know what this flying characteristics are going to be. Basically, all you're doing is changing the propulsion system in it. Awesome. You know, I think there's got a pretty good shot of making something like this happen versus the 1-seat or 5-seat EVTOLs. I think this 19-passenger solution is probably a good mix. It depends how fast they can certify it, though, right? That's the whole key. If you could certify it in 2022, have it up and running and done, I think there's definitely a marketplace for it. If it's going to be 2028, different story, right? So that it's all about getting it to marketplace. That is so critical in aircraft development right now. So the talk, you see a lot of talk about this aircraft on like LinkedIn, and a lot of the sort of the engineer types like me are like, this is a cool aircraft design. I think this has a chance of making it. And I agree with that. It does have a real chance of making it because it does simplify the certification effort, which is where you're going to spend a bunch of money. So it looks positive, really does.
Yeah. Well, and it looks like their goal is certified or for commercial flight by 2026. So 5 years off.
Right.
I mean, you've talked
Realistic.
about how long the certification cycle could take. Yeah.
Yep.
And it seems like it's reusing, like you said, a lot of the traditional design and nuts and bolts of stuff that's flown reliably and safely for many years. So,
right.
Yeah. I mean, you look at their renderings of it, and if they didn't tell you that it was electric, you wouldn't necessarily know.
Wouldn't know it.
Just looks like a plane. But like an attractive, like, mid-sized little, that regional jet. So, I know.
Well, it's very similar to the new airplane that FedEx is buying from Textron or Cessna, right? It's like it's a cargo airplane, but it's essentially based on the Beech 1900 design. It's a high wing Beech 1900, and that's what this hard airplane is like, which Textron Cessna has been able to put together in a really short amount of time and going to get certified. So if Textron's been able to do it in a couple of years, then there's a possibility that the Heart could do very similar things. So,
I mean, is this something that, by 2026, I mean, do you think even by that point, like, hey, battery technology is going to be significantly better? So whatever range they're projecting today, I think it's in the 300s. That might be 500. That's what I think is interesting, where we obviously have to make projections today about what kind of mileage and range and speed it could do, but 5 years is a lot of time for technology. And, I assume they could just, hey, now that we've got to the finish line, we're certified, we actually have 40% more range, for example, and this could apply to any of these electric aircraft.
That's right.
Not just the ES-19, but hey, now that we've gotten here, this is great. We get added benefit that batteries are way better. These electric engines are way better. So we're actually in pretty good shape. So I guess it's just kind of like getting it to the certification stage and getting all the engineering done, and then just hoping for the best, because just like with laptop batteries, all phone batteries, everything's gotten better significantly over time. So I guess that's something also to look forward to.
Well, I think that's going to be an option. I think what's going to happen as we get closer towards that certification end of it, that you're going to be able to buy the aircraft with a variety of sizes of batteries or amp hours in those packs, right? So as they get closer and they figure out the flight characteristics of the airplane, you could probably tailor the aircraft in terms of its storage capacity to the routes you're likely to fly, so you're not carrying dead weight, right? So I think there's going to be a lot more versatility in terms of the electric aircraft, because the amount of batteries you carry is related to the flights you're going to fly. So you could, in theory, lighten up the aircraft, because you're only flying 100-mile flights. It'd make a lot of sense, and I think you're going to see those options go. So not only battery capacity is going to get better as we go along, but I think you're going to allow the variability on how much they're going to carry.
So moving on to our final segment today, where we're going to chat some more about EVTOLs. First, we're going to talk about an article written by Brian Garrett Glazer, he's a managing editor of EVTOL.com. This article is on seekingalpha.com, and it's just about the stock market. So some of these EVTOL stocks, many of which are now going public via SPACs, their valuations are all over the board, right? And it's really interesting, and this has been the similar conversation with Tesla, which is, how could Tesla be valued at, close to all these other car companies combined, where they don't sell nearly as many cars, right?
Right.
And they are still, some of their technology is well proven and very advanced. Some of it's a little more unproven. Same goes, much more is unproven on the EVTOL side, but you've got companies like Joby with huge valuations that haven't sold a plane, that don't really have even a defined exact market yet. So, this article by Mr. Garrett Glazer is interesting. It just sort of speaks to all of that, which is these valuations are all over the place. It's tough to compare them. Urban air mobility is still really young, and it's tough to speculate on much of the future. What were some of your takeaways, Alan, and just in general on this whole SPAC valuation market?
Well, I think the market is distorted right now. Not that I've invested in it, because I'm not invested in it, but I think all the COVID and constriction of the marketplace, and there's a lot of cash floating around, has sort of thrown the valuations off a little bit, it feels like, because some of these valuations of companies that haven't produced a single aircraft are larger than existing aircraft companies. And that doesn't feel right. Now, eventually the marketplace will level itself out, because it has to, right? So depending on how well a particular eVTOL company does early on, or gets to certification, is going to really drive what that real value is. So early on, it's going to be hard to tell. As we get closer and closer to delivering those first set of aircraft, we're going to have a better sense of what that marketplace looks like, because orders will drive it. Now, if you got confirmed orders and they're putting down, say, $100,000 as a non-refundable deposit, those are serious orders. And then the market can kind of figure out where that valuation really is, versus sort of no orders yet and nothing that's confirmed yet. So, I think everybody's got, if you've been in the industry a long time, you're looking at this marketplace, you just think that things are really out of whack right now. But that's sort of normal. We've seen this sort of up and down cycle. It's happened in the past, so this is not unusual. But when you see it now with such these aircraft designs that don't have any airtime on them, so to speak, or piloted time on them, it just starts to raise a little bit of warning flags. They may get there.
Yeah, one of the facts that's thrown out in this article is that Joby Aviation is valued at 1.5 times that of Leonardo Helicopters, which is one of the largest helicopter manufacturers in the world.
Right.
And that just goes back to this whole idea of like company that's producing a product that's not yet to market, for a market that's sort of still, in the fog. It's just crazy. Like, how can you be valued at more than a company that's actually pumping out great helicopters every year? It's such an interesting time that we're in, where we're speculating on what companies could be in the future. And I mean, in 20 years, are EVTOLs puttering all over? Probably. Maybe. You could definitely see them for lots of different uses. I could see them on farms, and we've talked about going to offshore oil rigs and wind turbine sites, and lots of commercial uses potentially. But
the price matters, though.
Yeah.
Right. I think the price matters, and the likely price point for at least some of these electric aircraft is in the couple $1 million range. And that doesn't play well with the used aircraft market. There's too much of a disparity there for basically similar size aircraft. You can buy King Air, 2 King Airs for that amount of money. And yeah, it's not quote unquote green, but it flies further and has a much better service history, because you got oodles of years of experience with it. So it doesn't have all those birthing problems, right? And I think that's where they're going to have trouble. Is you got to convince the marketplace, and particularly the pilots, that it's worth the extra money. Is it really worth the extra money? And obviously Tesla has gone through that same sort of thing. Is it worth the extra money for the whiz bang of it? Well, there's a lot more people that drive cars than fly airplanes. There just are, right? Flying an airplane requires a lot of time, money, experience before you can even fly one. The car, if you have good vision, you can essentially, and pass a little test, you can pretty much drive a car. So the marketplace is much bigger, I think, and they're going to have trouble I believe they're going to have trouble finding pilots, and are they going to operate some sort of Uber service? And all those things sort of add up. Like, man, there's so many moving parts to this, and I need every one of them to go exactly right. What's the likelihood of having a positive outcome? Don't know, right? But it doesn't feel right yet. And so I think over the next couple of months, the Jobies of the world need to kind of punch this one down and show how they're going to make this happen.
Yeah, that's an interesting notion. My mind started trailing off to, if you bought an EVTOL, 15 years from now, and you own one personally, and something breaks, something needs to get fixed, just like you'd fix your Cessna or your own little private plane. How much more does that part cost now? Just like, owning a BMW or Mercedes versus owning a Toyota. Right. I had a friend who's like, he's like, man, I love my BMW, but it just kills me when I have to pay $300 for an oil change versus, $50 for your Toyota, because it has to go to the BMW dealership. It has to get their special, their weight oil and their, all their brands. You're paying full brand name price for every little thing.
Right.
And that's part of the experience. Like, you don't buy a BMW if you can't afford the oil change, right? Well, it's like, you could find a part for a, little Cessna for X amount of dollars. But is that equivalent part got to come only from a company like Joby, and it will 5 times the cost? Yeah. I mean, is there even an aftermarket?
The answer to that's yes.
Yes.
That's the way that works. Yeah. That's totally the way it works. But I'll give you the sort of the downside risk you take. So on any new aircraft company, the downside risk is that if you buy the airplane company's not there in 2 years, and you can't get parts. What do you do?
Yeah, that's true.
What do you do?
Yeah, I think about that a lot with these startups that smartly offer like lifetime warranty or like lifetime whatever to this like software thing. I'm like, you could be out of business next year. Like, I've never heard of your company before. Like, okay, like I'll spend $400 on this fancy new piece of luggage with a lifetime warranty, but what's the odds that your company exists in 5 years? Very slim, when you get acquired and they don't honor the warranty anymore.
Right. So which is the risk, right? And like Eclipse aircraft, it was a problem. If you own an Eclipse aircraft and it's a great airplane, it's hard getting parts. It's hard, and then, trying to create that secondary market for an airplane that is no longer manufactured is really difficult. With a Cessna or a Beech or a Bombardier or Embraer or somebody, you feel like they're going to be there next week, or Cirrus, they're going to be there next week, right? And so you're more willing to buy the Cirrus Vision jet than a comparable new company airplane just for that reason, because you're likely to own it for multiple years, and you're going to need maintenance and service. And the way the FAA system is set up, unlike cars, the FAA airplane business is set up, you got to buy parts from essentially the manufacturer or approved manufacturer of that component. And if they don't make them, it gets really hard to keep your airplane airworthy. And that's a huge risk on a multi-million-dollar aircraft. Huge risk.
So moving on, our last segment today, well, not segment, our last talking point here is the Cavorite X5 by Horizon. And their CEO was quoted in had a bunch of quotes in a recent Rob Report article, just talking about safety of electric air taxis and what that industry is going to have to look like. And he had some really thoughtful quotes just about how high the safety bar has got to be. It's got to be as safe or safer than helicopters, because that first crash is going to be such a risk to the whole industry in general.
Yeah, it will.
So all that being said, that's a good thing that CEOs of these EVTOL companies recognize that, specifically here with Horizon. But so their aircraft, the X5, is interesting. It's a hybrid propulsion. It's got a gas engine that could actually take pump gas, and really interesting design. It's pretty sleek. It's got a pusher prop in the back. Alan, what jumps out to you about the Cavorite X5?
Well, that they're using existing sort of fuel engine technology to power it. I think that's the differentiator. And when you do that, you socially have infinite amount of power, so to speak, especially for takeoff and landing, which is what you need. You need you're going to burn a lot of electricity on takeoff and landing for these fans. And so you need a big power source. Well, you do that with a gas motor. That's how they're going to do it. And then, there's this is not unique, but there's been a good bit of talk about vertical takeoff, vertical landing is gas powered or hydrogen powered or something, and then forward flight is pure electric battery. That would make some sense to me. But you got this extra weight of a motor sitting out on the back of this airplane, and what do you do? What's the fuel tank look like? How does this all work? The complexities of it. You got two systems working in parallel. There's some complexities to it, but I think there's a little more of a rationality to it, of trying to cover both situations. If you really want a vertical takeoff and landing, or you really want to be able to hover and really take off vertically, you're gonna need a big power source to do it. So it's kind of a combination of the best of both worlds.
Yeah, and that seems like a good system. I know you're a fan of the hybrids, and especially with battery technology not being as proven out as it needs to be yet, with just the weight and the energy density of it. But yeah, that's an interesting idea that this could use pump gas. That seems like, I mean, is that common to turboprops? Is that like,
no?
What aircraft use pump gas?
Not many, hardly any. Right, because the aviation world wants to control the fuel you're putting in the aircraft because it matters so much. Right, so if you go to the local convenience store and buy gas, there's a greater than 20% chance it's going to have water in it and not be the best fuel. Mm-hmm. In the aviation world, you want to have consistency in the fuel you're burning, so you don't tend to use standard automotive gas. That's why you don't do it. That's why you use gas or something that's a lot more controlled and monitored. Obviously, like the little ultralights, the parachute airplane things have used that kind of gas forever because they're basically using chainsaw motors or two-cycle motors to do their thing. But for most aircraft, that just really makes zero sense, because if you lose that fuel source, are you flying anymore, or are you going to do damage to the engine because you got bad gas going into this really expensive engine? It's a problem. It's a really big problem. So you don't, from the design standpoint, you don't start there typically.
All right. Well, that'll do it for today's episode of Struck. If you're new to the show, thank you so much for listening, and please leave a review and subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Check out the WeatherGuard Lightning Tech YouTube channel for video episodes, full interviews, and short clips from the show. And follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Our handle is @WGLightning. Tune in next Tuesday for another great episode on aviation, aerospace engineering, and lightning protection. Strike Tape, WeatherGuard Lightning Tech's proprietary lightning protection for radomes, provides unmatched durability for years to come. If you need help with your radome lightning protection, reach out to us at weatherguardaero.com. That's weatherguardaero.com.